and dying in your beds many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
And welcome to Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.TV. Thank you for joining me this evening. A lot to talk about with this mass shooting in Orlando. But most of it seems to deal with guns right off the bat. So that's where we're going to focus, because don't mind the shooting, the shooter's motives, none of that. We need to focus on gun control. Even though mass shootings amount to some of the, it's a very small percentage of the national murders here in America. So to focus on them and claim that's why we need gun control, ban assault rifles, which is a very misleading term, inappropriate term. There's a lot of information out there in the alternative media and social media aspect of information. Some raising concerns, more of it also, trying to push this narrative that it was because the guns. And, of course, they went after the AR, even though, if you look at it, the AR is one of the most popular rifle of those type. But that's not what was used. Plus, there are many other versions of rifles that operate in a different manner, but are in a sense the same type of a rifle. And using their logic, because all of those are out there, you would think that, well, there would be mass shootings every 5 seconds where, the news wouldn't be able to follow them all. But that's not what you see. Because, again, it's propaganda to push an agenda, and they immediately jumped on it. As soon as this happened, it was media going after guns. And of course, now you got Republicans also going, yeah, we should do that. And of course, there are many of the obvious progressive Republicans. And I've been warning for a while, for a long while now, that I truly believe that before Obama leaves office, that he will enact some type of, if Congress won't do it, he will use executive action at some point. Which can spell all kinds of other difficulties that might come along with that. Different scenarios. But that might also be why maybe some on the right might go, we need to try to write something that really limits what they're trying to do. Either way, they're still trying to limit you to a point. So, we'll end up spending quite a bit of time on this issue. And it's one of those things that every time this comes up, it's the same old story, but we have to be, we can't just go, oh, they're just playing this card again. Let's sit back and laugh at them. It's not that simple. That's what they want you to do. Sit back and, kind of laugh it off, and we will actually be able to get this passed through. So we will be getting into that, but I did want to get into this Ron Paul Liberty Report because I did have two of them, but the second one I'm going to play towards the end when we're more getting into the whole shooting and where they're going with the gun legislation that they're trying to push through. But I did want to get on to a little bit with the economy. And I'm looking at this whole bubble and everything that is kind of being played out here. And even though I'm not a big conspiracy theorist, I only kind of believe what evidence has proven to me. There's a lot of elements that seem to be playing out that worry me. One is this election cycle. Hillary Clinton, really? Really? Hillary Clinton. Literally, what are, most people, even on the left, go, Hillary. No, I don't support Hillary. And Donald Trump. And I'm going, this, I just don't even see how this is even real. It seems like a really bad movie. And I'm thinking to myself, and I'm going, what, where has society went that we've gotten to this point? Then I'm looking at the economy. And some are suspecting that the Fed might actually attempt to raise interest. And I'm thinking, with the economy where it's at right now, I don't see that being something that would work out. And then we see Obama at the end and all these shootings and the push for gun legislation. And I even think there's some Republicans going, we should do this for his legacy. Because they have this grandeur of themselves in this, little mini society that they've created in DC. Even though they might not like each other all the time, it's kind of how like Ventura talked about where, it's like wrestling out in public. You hate each other behind closed doors. You have drinks with each other. That's kind of paraphrasing what he said, but basically what he said. And I'm looking at all the possibilities, and there just does not seem to be a good outcome. And what does that spell for America and Americans and the world? And a lot of what people have been ignoring lately is the economy. And most of my listeners know I definitely pay close attention to the economy. And I cover the economy a lot because I really do believe that if you don't pay attention, you are going to be in for rude awakening, because when our economy has not truly recovered from the 2008 recession, and we are seeing the potential for this bubble to pop, and they want to go after the little guy all the time, and you wonder why the big guys get off scotch-free, all these tax write-offs and tax. Again, it's a society outside of our society. Special treatment, not equal treatment, special treatment. They all work together. They're all friends. And eventually the power structure will get so deep that they will no longer need to play the election, scheme. Because, again, there's always people pulling the strings behind the scenes. So it becomes something that they no longer need to do. And you kind of see that with them being more open about, their beliefs in a lot of this. And it's going to get worse if we don't have someone that, gets in office and actually tries to, block a lot of this. There's a few people, I believe, that have good intent and are trying to do the best, but very few. And we just don't have enough of those Ron Paul people in there. But I do want to get to this Ron Paul Liberty Report. This is the war on wage earners in one surprising chart. And even though you're not going to be able to see the chart, you'll be able to hear the explanation of the chart. So here we go.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Good. Well, I think the audience knows that you and I look at Zero Hedge quite frequently.
Sure.
This week he had an interesting article, caught our attention, talked about gold. And it really opens the door for a good discussion about gold and economic policy. The article that they posted came from Ralph Benko, who's been interested in gold over the years. And I've worked with him, even though we don't agree on the same gold standard. Both of us recognize the importance of gold. And we will talk a little bit about that. But Benko, in his article, introduces an article and a statement by Stan Sorcher, who was a labor representative. So he most likely was coming, from the left. And but he had an interesting approach to get our attention, and we want to do that. And I don't know whether you happen to have seen this chart.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, if we can pull up this chart, I think it really graphically demonstrates, and Sorcher points out something happened in the early to mid 1970s. We stopped valuing labor. We stopped valuing the working man. Benko has a different point of view, but you have always talked about a date in the early 70s, and if you look at this chart.
Yeah, I think the chart is very fascinating. It's very dramatic. You can produce a lot of charts like this. If you wanted to look at debt, you could put debt up there, the size of government, the number of pages of the Federal Register. A lot happened since the early 70s. But I've said it so many times, but to me, August 15th, 1971 was a big, big day in my understanding what was going on. Because I had started studying Austrian economics in the 60s and became fascinated, in particular, the explanation that they gave for monetary policy affecting the business cycle. And all through the 60s, I was watching gold carefully, and they were rigging gold. They kept it much lower than the market rate. But the Austrian says it's going to fail, it's going to fail. They never said what date it was going to fail. But it was a friable system that could not last, and that was the Bretton Woods system. It was a pseudo-gold standard. Mm-hmm. And because they said that as long as we have enough gold and we can honor the gold standard at $35 an ounce, we can do this forever. So sort of like what they're arguing about the dollar standard today. So they kept doing that, but finally the market caught up with them. And the conclusive evidence that the Austrians were right on this was August 15th. And that was the night that Richard Nixon, on a Sunday night, made the announcement that they would close the gold window, which was an admission in many ways of a bankruptcy of the country. We no longer could honor our commitments. People didn't worry about it. They haven't still worried too much about it, but we pay our debt and we pay our bills with fiat money we create out of thin air. But this was dramatic, but ushered in a new age. There were a lot who didn't think it would last very long, but it's lasted for 45 years. But the chart that we see there is very important because wages did this, level, didn't go up, and yet productivity went up and spending went up, GDP went up. And the big question is why this happened. I think there's a monetary explanation for this. Matter of fact, there was another prediction made by Mises when he wrote so much about what was going on in our country. He said that when a country decides through central banking or whatever to devalue the currency by printing too much, inflation that's inflating the currency causes a distortion in the economy. Some prices go up and a lot of prices go up, and you just get a lot of malinvestment. You have the business cycle. But he says the one long-term characteristic of debasement of the currency, that is steady eroding value of the dollar, which is what the Fed has done, for 100 years, the steady erosion of the dollar, the worst consequence, he claimed, the economic consequence was the wiping out of the middle class. So do you think the middle class is very happy today?
Absolutely not. And, the interesting thing about the chart, and I want to ask you about it, because it does, the reason why it caught our attention is it's so dramatic. There was a crossing of the two and one going completely out of control. But I wonder, why is it that while the wages stayed steady, it seems as if productivity increased dramatically? Are the workers just working that much harder for less money, or are they dummies, or what does it mean?
Well, I think first some of these charts are deceptive. They're not really telling you real economic growth. It might be an illusion of growth because it's based on debt. You know, if you and I borrow a lot of money and we have fancy cars, it might look like we're very wealthy. But if it's all based on debt, we're not as wealthy. And much of what we have done was an illusion, but the country benefited, especially because what was substituted for Bretton Woods was the dollar standard, the fiat dollar standard, which was even worse than the Bretton Woods. And yet we've been going along. But what we're seeing now is the conclusion of that and the end of that. But what happens is when the Fed creates the money to pay the debt and buy treasury bills and inject money in to protect the banks and bail out big corporations and all, the money supply goes up, which is supposed to stimulate the economy, increase productivity for the working man and give him good jobs. But it doesn't work that way. The money goes into the system in a different way when the government just prints it versus when it comes in under a gold standard. It enters for economic reasons and business decisions. So it goes in, and the people who get the money first do the best. And guess who gets the money first?
Wall Street.
The banks and the business corporations, the government, the bureaucrats, they end up getting it. And then when that money circulates, it tends to push prices up. And even though the government will try to tell you, well, there's no inflation here, no inflation, and no big problem, the truth is people's incomes haven't kept up with, the productivity. The income nominally has gone up, but what they have is shortage of money because the prices have gone up much faster, and that makes them unhappy. I think it introduces, a lot of political problems too, and I think that's what we're witnessing today in the presidential race.
Well, you've always said people sense that something's wrong. They don't quite understand what it is. And I think that's one of the other reasons this caught our attention, because the whole structure of the article was Ralph Benko correcting what he views as the misperception, and we would agree, of Stan Sorcher. And Sorcher said, well, there was a change in our moral values in the early 70s, and that's kind of an unsatisfying, very subjective view of what happened, maybe partially true. But then Benko comes through and he makes a very statement I think you would agree with. The destruction of the gold standard precipitated the death of the American dream. But then he goes on to describe, to correct Sorcher in a way that you would only partially agree with.
That's right. Benko wants to use the gold standard, but you're right in quoting Sorcher, because he said it was moral and personal values and political values, which sets the stage for more government to redistribute wealth and take from one and a welfare distribution. Probably, my guess is that he probably wouldn't mind what Sanders is doing. It's really go after Wall Street and the people who make money and redistribute it. So, but he doesn't talk about, he doesn't even mention the monetary problem as the monetary system as a problem. But Benko comes in and says, rightfully, there's something wrong with the monetary system, and a gold standard would help, and it would. But the one thing that I have qualms with is that, and he makes this point that we have to do it right, because he knows there's different opinions. And like I said, I know often we've talked about it and we debate, but he has always been in the camp of the supply siders, and what they have advocated is a gold price rule, which probably offers some assistance, because if the price of gold goes up too fast, they know that the monetary system, they're printing too much money, but it's sort of after the fact, after the damage was done. Because if all of a sudden you're printing money and gold in the market stays like this, they're reassured. Well, it must be okay. But what happens when there's a circulation and prices surge upwards? Then you're in a mess. What do? You have to cut back. It's sort of, after the fact. But a 100% gold standard, which is something Austrians believe in, and certainly Murray Rothbard talked about it, that you have to have convertibility. And they really believe that you should have instant convertibility, where you're instantly reassured that if you have a certificate that says this is worth 1 ounce of gold, originally it was a $20 bill, was convertible into a gold. People didn't carry their gold around, but they got worried about it. They'd turn it in and get their gold coin about it. And so there is a big difference here between the pseudo gold standard and a real gold standard. But Benko actually puts a good spin on this, because it's sort of like the supply siders, and I support their positions when they want to cut taxes. Cutting taxes is very good. Reduce rates, and that's a salvation of the economy. But their argument is, and what they're hoping for, is it increases revenues. And I say there's only one thing to do when you increase revenues: you cut more taxes, you cut more spending. But here, Ralph argues the case that if we do go to this gold standard, there's so much money out there, there would be so much stimulation to the economy. And he comes up, I'd sort of like to see the calculation, that there's $6 trillion worth of taxes that all of a sudden will roll in, and the government will be able to spend this on whatever, maybe even military, increase the money in the military. There's a bunch of people who like to do this. And he said, we wouldn't even have to raise rates. We wouldn't have to do it. But the government will be flooded with money by merely going to this other standard. I think that under the true gold standard, the economy is going to thrive. But the purpose is for the people to benefit, to make sure the working class people get the money and the purchasing power goes up, and that you don't have central economic planning. And I think that would be the answer, rather than saying, well, this is a boondoggle for the government. Yeah. We're not advocating that.
Yeah, there's a philosophical difference. And I understand that Benko is making an appeal to progressives. And so I think he flavors his argument in a way that would appeal to progressives. But there's more than a little progressivism in his own argument, which is that the government would have so much more money to pass around. And if the Austrian argument is the government does not have the ability to pass it around in an efficient way. But, the other advantage would be to progressives would be the gold standard would reduce the warfare state. And I think that would appeal to many progressives, because you would have to pay for your wars. You couldn't put them onto the next generation or inflate them away. The problem would be for the progressives, of course, that it would also hurt the welfare state, which is centralized in control of the federal and state governments. And so they have that pot of money. But, it sort of reflects a view of society that man is inherently evil and would never give to his neighbor unless the government was holding a gun in its hand.
They have their hands out.
But, I was going to say, Dr. Paul, we've had floods down here over the past week or so. And I can say, just from a personal standpoint, we had problems in our house. Our neighbors didn't hesitate for a second to offer us anything to help us out. And that's how people are. Look at when there's a tragedy here in the U.S., people immediately open their checkbooks.
Wasn't FEMA knocking on your door wanting to help you?
FEMA wasn't there, but our neighbors were.
Remember how long our constituents complained about getting the assistance from FEMA? Months,
Yeah, we'd rather stay flooded than have FEMA.
Yeah. But, I think this issue of appealing to the working class, it is a populist approach. So libertarianism, I think, when it's dealt with correctly, does get people in the middle class and the working class to get excited, but that's quite a bit different than an authoritarian approach to populism, where you literally force money going from one pocket to another. But Samuel Gompers, the great labor leader that during the Industrial Revolution, he was a strong supporter of the gold standard. He thought it protected the working class people, because there's nothing worse than eroding the value of the currency, because it is a tax, and it's a vicious tax. It's an invisible tax. It's hard to identify, and some people will say, it's unfair. Give me more money. I don't have enough money. Instead of saying, I want money that has real value, that you can't steal from me. It's a taxation. They tax us outwardly, but right now, a lot of people don't pay income tax. They pay Social Security tax, but they don't pay income tax, but they still suffer. More so because when you see this, their real wages aren't going up. But if you add in there the sales taxes and different things, or prices on products, percentage-wise, they suffer a lot more than a billionaire on Wall Street. They don't care what a loaf of bread costs, but person living on the margin, it's very, very difficult. So monetary policy is key. I think this article is good that it calls attention to it. But I do think, and Benko invites people and knows that we're going to have a discussion about this. And we want to get it right. I want to get it right too. So, but there's also the other thing to deal with is, can you move in a certain direction without getting everything that you want? And if you're working with progressives, if you can get to work with progressives and say that we're going to cut the spending out of these senseless wars without, eliminating food stamps totally and completely in one day, which doesn't make any sense. I think we should. But the whole problem is what we're facing is going to be cataclysmic. You're not going to have a chance to plan and sort it out and cut back overseas. And the people who have the most clout and the most authoritarian, who can scare the people the most, are people going to be more frightened of ISIS, or are they going to be more frightened about what their paycheck pays? And there's going to be a lot of fear out there. And it's being held in here, but not many people are out there saying, that's why this was a good article. At least they're saying, well, maybe more people should talk about it. And I think Benko indicated that the Republicans are thinking more about it. I guess that remains to be seen. Do you think you've heard more from your Republican allies?
My allies. Well, he did say the GOP is beginning to come around to the gold standard, and I mentioned that to you, and you said, "Well, I hope that's the case." Yeah. You're not sure, but there has been a lot more written about it lately, which is encouraging.
Well, I'll tell you what really brings people around to monetary reform. It's good that we have people in the intellectual community discussing this and planning it, but ultimately, what happens is they're forced to do it. The money quits working. It's like in Zimbabwe, they have to quit and do something different. And that is what will happen here. You'll have to stop. If you want to preserve what we have, you have to just stop printing money. You have to stop the spending. And there's no mood in this country for this right now. There's too much support for free stuff, and there's too much support for war stuff. And nobody's worried enough about the nature of money and why gold is important, because the most important role, or at least one of the close to the most important role, it restrains the government. It restrains the government's ability to print money and do all the things that they're not supposed to be doing. That is the day that we should work for, and the reforms will mean not only monetary reforms, it will be reforming the nature of government. We have to decide, what should the role of government be? And certainly we have a challenge there, because the role of government that we're facing today is totally out of control. And my suggestion has always been, look at Article 1, Section 8, and only do the things that we're authorized to do in our government, and we might get a good start in going in the right direction. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.
Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube. Check them out, subscribe, and also check out RonPaulLibertyReport.com. Now, monetary policy is one of the main things that we should be focused on. When they just continue to print money, and, society has relied on the almighty dollar, whether it be paper or digital form. Every time they print more, whether it be paper or digital form, they devalue your dollar, because now it will take more dollars to, buy something. The purchasing power of that dollar declines. And one thing I've also pointed out is that it being a petrodollar is one thing that has helped it, which we're pretty much in a losing streak with the petrodollar, in the sense that, not that, we've lost the petrodollar, in the sense that we've got a global move that seems to be tilting towards going away from the U.S. dollar as a petrodollar. That seems to be getting more tilting that way. And something like the gold standard could even prevent that, but it would also put backing behind the dollar. But where we are now, is that even achievable? It is, but it's very complicated to get into and put it into a 15-minute segment. But it's one of those things that if we make a move towards that, we might actually slow down and eventually reverse a collapse. But there will be hurting, but there's going to be hurting anyways. We've seen what happened after the 2008 crash. And we haven't truly recovered. And we're not going to if we continue on the monetary path that we're on right now. That's why, monetary policy should be talked about a lot more, but it's not. Not in the mainstream. How much do we actually hear about the monetary policy other than them reporting on what the Fed's going to do? They don't debate whether the Fed should even be doing that or even should be in charge of this, being a private-owned entity. But there's also more to the economy in any nation when it comes to the average population. And it's having that freedom and that ability to work your way up, to create something for yourself and your family, and to prosper from that. I had one here out at FEE.org, Foundation for Economic Education. This one by Jeffrey Tucker, and it's in the technology section. Says, with Open Bazaar, everyone can be a retailer without permission. Digital technology empowering people in unthinkable ways. What if every person in the world, regardless of social status, language, or nationality, could open a retail store available to everyone, asking no one's permission? What if no one could stand in that person's way? It wasn't possible 12 months ago, but it is today. What if this store could deliver goods and services while accepting payment from anyone in the world using no bank, conventional payment system, or financial intermediary? It wasn't possible before the invention of cryptocurrency, but it is today. And that, again, is why I say be diverse in what you put your wealth into, whether it be gold, silver, and cryptocurrencies. If you want to hold cash, you probably should hold some cash. But you should be diverse, seeds, vegetables, food supply, water, diversify your wealth. Sustain yourself, basically. Don't put it on one thing and lose it all. It says, and what if the store was so decentralized that no government in the world could take it down? No one could imagine such a thing a decade and a half ago, but it's reality today. The technology that makes it possible is not a website, but rather an application that anyone can download and run. It has just come out of beta and is already in use by many thousands of people around the world. So far as I know, the Foundation for Economic Education is the first major nonprofit organization to use the new technology. It is called openbazaar.org. To see the FEE store, go to FEE store at feestore. Anyone can download the application, shop, and make a store with no fees and no further plugins or fuss. The payment system is the international digital currency Bitcoin, which depends not on the value or status of any national monetary system. The Open Bazaar platform itself, just like Bitcoin, has no central point of failure, so it cannot be hunted down and destroyed by governments. The platform operates peer-to-peer with no permission necessary from any third party. How can buyer and seller be sure that each is fulfilled the terms of their contract? How does it prevent sellers and buyers from running away with each other's property? The platform uses another innovation that only came into its own a few years ago, multi-sig. Open Bazaar explains, if you both agree to a price, the client creates a contract between you both with your digital signatures and sends it to a third party called a moderator. These moderators are also folks on the Open Bazaar network. Could be your neighbor or someone across the world who the buyer and seller trust in case something goes wrong. The third party witnesses the contract and creates a multi-signature Bitcoin account, multi-sig, that requires 2 of 3 people to agree before the Bitcoin can be released. The buyer then sends the agreed upon amount to the multi-sig address. You get a notification saying the buyer has sent the funds, and you ship the laptop to them and mark that it has been shipped. The buyer receives it a few days later, and they mark it received, which releases the funds from multi-sig to you. You got your Bitcoin, the buyer got the laptop, no fees paid, no one stopped your trade, everyone's happy. To make such an invention possible, there had to be Bitcoin in the first place, which itself appeared in 2009 in response to the crying need for an internet currency that lives outside the borders of the nation state and is not controlled by any central bank. The invention of Bitcoin itself relied on innovations in distributed networks, cryptography, and cloud-based ledgers to keep track of who owns what. With the appearance of Open Bazaar, we can observe the next brick in place for a global open commercial infrastructure scalable to the whole of the human population and functioning outside any existing legal structure of any nation state. It is a tremendous tribute to human ingenuity and a bullish sign for the prospects of human liberty itself. Brick by brick, and yet every innovation depends on many previous innovations, which is why no one should forget what actually gave rise to this achievement. It was the famous Silk Road, February 2001 to October 2014, the first and most famous self-regulating digital free market to accept Bitcoin. It was shut down because it became a choice venue for the distribution of products such as marijuana that is now legal in many places. For being ahead of his time, the founder and creator, Ross Ulbright, has been sentenced to 2 lifetimes in prison. Ross's retail innovation inspired many to see some extraordinary potential here. Where the Silk Road went wrong was being too centralized. Once the FBI found the administrator, the bureaucrats snagged him with the admin window open and thereby gain access to all data. That cannot happen to OpenBazaar because the platform itself is distributed all over the world. Like the Bitcoin Hydra itself takes every advantage of the borderlessness and spontaneous order of digital spaces in a way that maximizes human freedom. Anytime we speak about such innovations, it's hard to resist speaking about the extraordinary technology. But in the end, it is not really about cryptography, distributed networks, multi-sig payment systems, and so on. It is really about the universal empowerment of the individual human being. I like to think of a simple woman in Mozambique, desperately poor but with a talent for sewing. Perhaps she makes hand-dyed bow ties. She has a smartphone and a cell network, access to which runs 1/4 of her income. With this network, she can reach the entire world with her product and even build a big business. With the maturing of the Bitcoin network, she can earn income that can become capital to build a thriving business. It is not development aid or governments that did this. It's the power of entrepreneurship in the digital age. Thanks to technologies like OpenBazaar, the long-term future looks very bright. Now, I talk about the fact that we don't truly have a free market because we have a system where big business has written the rules that benefit them and put a damper on small business. Putting regulations and things in place that for a large international corporation to pay, a $10,000 fine is not as hurtful to a small mom and pop's store. They're going to be, hurting $10,000. They're just starting up. They don't have that money. They're trying to, get out of the hole right now. The free market, I think, will become when we see society go more towards the mom and pop stores to say, I'll pay that extra 50 cents, and hopefully we can have that gap shortened, which I'm seeing it now. I'm starting to see where you can go on the internet and you can buy, 1,000 of one product and get it for so cheap you could meet the same prices Walmart might be selling that product. Not all products. Some, Walmart is still getting their deals. But it's starting to kind of get a little bit freer again with the internet. And then you have things like this OpenBazaar that can potentially give even more entrepreneurs, where now you can have two entrepreneurs helping each other. You have one entrepreneur that manufactures. Then you have another entrepreneur that sells those type of products, and they can grab from multiple entrepreneurs, like Jeffrey Tucker, bow ties. Well, you find a few different bow tie people from around the world that make their unique bow ties, and you have a store that has the collections from around the world. It's something that we have to find ways that don't entrap us in a system where, well, everything becomes centralized in the marketplace. And that's what's led to the decline, I believe, in our economy. When there were actual, not so centralized business, there was competition. There was I have to do better. I have to. There's no ifs, ands, buts about it. But there was also more equal playing grounds. Now, you can argue back to the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, and all that about, all of the corruption, which it existed, but not like it does today. Because now you even have all of them that work together. And they eventually did. These families eventually go, hey, how about we stop fighting each other and just make it where we don't have to worry about anybody else getting up to our level to challenge us. Okay. Now, I do want to get on to the shooting that has happened and all this gun control mayhem. I have a few articles here. Give me a second. Sorry, I'm having a little issue here. Restart this browser. Okay. Getting the browser back up here. Okay. Now, I have a quick clip, a little 6-minute clip from We Are Change. And this is full breakdown what you need to know about the Orlando shooting. And I have quite a few articles here to cover. So I just want to play this real quick.
In this video, we're going to give you all the important news, the latest developments, and the breaking news about the deadliest and worst mass shooting event in U.S. history. Everyone is mourning after Omar Martin, 30-year-old American citizen with Afghan descent, here pictured wearing NYPD t-shirts while he was taking a selfie, decided to enter a gay club in Orlando, where he automatically was engaged with a gun battle with police officers. The police officers then, after Martin went to the club, after the gun battle, waited 3 hours. 3 hours. While people trapped inside the club desperately called and messaged friends and relatives. Eventually, after those 3 hours, police crashed into the building with an armored vehicle and stun grenades and killed Martin. Martin had 3 hours to kill 50 people, to injure 53 other individuals. There's actual video of an eyewitness on the local news in Orlando saying that he believes Martin had assistance and help from the inside. This eyewitness was cut off, but you could watch this ABC video in the description below and fact check and source everything we are saying. Now, who was Martin? He actually worked for the world's largest security company. He worked for a company that was transporting illegal immigrants inside of the United States. The company, G4S, which Vanity Fair did a feature piece on, called the Chaos Company. Whenever governments can't or won't maintain order, from oil fields in Africa to airports in Britain and nuclear facilities in America, the London-based global security G4S has been filling the void. This is the company that granted him a job and a security license. His wife says that Mateen was on steroids and that he was mentally ill. She also talks about how he physically abused her for not doing chores around the house. He was also a registered Democrat. And in 2013, Mateen was actually interviewed twice by federal agents after co-workers reported that he made inflammatory comments to them about radical Islamic propaganda. The following year, 2014, the FBI looked at him again because of ties with an American who traveled to the Middle East to become a suicide bomber. He was then placed on the terrorist watch list, which was maintained by the FBI. He pledged allegiance to ISIS, and ISIS actually announced 3 days before the Orlando massacre that there would be an attack inside of Florida. Now, during this time when we are still finding out all the facts of everything that has happened, you would expect, especially when the news just broke, for the mainstream media to at least have their thoughts with the victims, to at least not jump to conclusions, to at least not point blame and fingers based off their own political agenda. But of course, they did not, and they automatically started calling the shooter a white Christian. Now, that information, of course, is incorrect. There are other people using this extremely tragic event to push their political agenda and blame right-wing Christian conservatives. Our government right now is calling for a ban on weapons and guns. Bernie Sanders just blatantly calls for a ban on all automatic weapons within the United States, even though where the shooting took place, it was a gun-free zone. A previous attempted terrorist attack inside of Texas was prevented because people were armed and were able to defend themselves against radical Islamic terrorists. As we're speaking, Facebook is actually deleting the Stop Islamization of America page after the Orlando attacks. Reddit is banning users, deleting their accounts after they mention anything about Muslims. And here we see a clear Reddit post after the Charleston shooter, calling him a white supremacist, being pushed forward, being upvoted, being on the main page. Meanwhile, when it came out that the news that this guy was a radical Islamic terrorist, this was off topic and censored and banned. And as we are speaking, there's more news developing with a man who was just apprehended by law enforcement who was headed to LA for a Pride event. As everything is still developing, as everything is still breaking, it is still extremely complex to make a definitive decision on what exactly happened here. We are still finding out the facts, but one question that you and all of America should have is where was our government? Where was the NSA during San Bernardino, during Chattanooga, and now after Orlando? Where was the FBI that investigated this guy 3 times when he was already on a terror watch list and still able to buy guns, still able to get a security license, still able to work for the world's largest security company in the world, and at the same time was given 3 hours by responding police units, 3 hours to commit this horrible, horrendous crime? Ask questions, demand answers. We're going to have more important developments on this event because it will have huge political repercussions in this country. So stay tuned. Subscribe to youtube.com/we are change.
We are Change on YouTube, and we are change.org. Check them out. Let me get to this. Okay. Now we have the UN Human Rights Chief coming out saying that the U.S. needs robust gun regulation. Oh, yeah, the UN. Sticking their nose in something they don't have authority over. That's the problem. Look at this creation called the United Nations that now believes that it has authority over nations. It will bridge the sovereignty of nations. Whether it be something bad is actually happening, or they just don't like what, freedoms a certain nation has, or, sticks up for, it becomes something where it's still not your business. We keep putting people in these social constructs that are nations or societies or, global citizens. The problem is we forget the individual and the individual's right. That trumps the rest of the rights. And really, the rest of the rights aren't rights. You don't have a right to mob rule. That's not a right. You have a right to voluntarily interact with each other, help each other, but we forget about the individual. But it says here, this out of cnsnews.com, UN Human Rights Chief says U.S. needs robust gun regulation. The United Nations Human Rights Chief called on the United States Tuesday to enforce more effective gun control measures in the aftermath of the Orlando terrorist attack, dismissing as irresponsible pro-gun propaganda the notion that firearms make society safer. UN Human Rights Commissioner Zeid Ra'ad al-Hussein urged the U.S. government to live up to its obligation to protect citizens from the horrifyingly commonplace but preventable violent attacks that are the direct result of insufficient gun control. Oh no, there was sufficient gun control. Only one person had a gun. That's the problem. Gun control. Examples from many countries clearly show that a legal framework to control the acquisition and use of firearms has led to a dramatic reduction in violent crime, said Zeid. No. It showed a decrease in crime used with firearms, which it didn't go away, it just decreased. But other violent crimes went up. You just don't, report on most of them. Rape, theft, vandalism happens all over Europe, and they literally just don't do anything about it. Now they're having even more of it with the flood of immigrants, not just, allowing immigrants into, no, a flood of immigrants, to the point that, these people are coming in and just being let go into society with no, guarantee of somewhere to go. And then when that becomes a problem, they're literally going after people that they believe have a little bit extra space that they should give up. No, that doesn't actually go with the statistics there. In the United States, however, there are hundreds of millions of guns in the circulation, and every year thousands of people are killed or injured by them. Well, some were criminals, some were killed by government, officers, some justified, some not. And some might have been accidents, and then the rest have to be divided, whether it was, illegal guns or people that illegally obtained the gun to the, maybe someone that legally obtained a gun. And then you see the big pictures, and it's really interesting how they manipulate by putting the wrong words in there to make you go, oh, really? Crime goes down with less guns? No. Crime doesn't go down. The deaths from or injuries from the firearms go down because there's less of them. That's including the people that use them for self-defense. That's including, the people that might be using them for illegal activities. But it doesn't get rid of all the illegal activities. But anybody that previously would legally defend themselves with the weapon would now be criminals if they choose to try to continue to defend themselves using a firearm. So now you turn them into a victim. Rather than a human being that can stand on their own 2 feet. Zayed deplored what he called the ease with which individuals can buy firearms in America in spite of prior criminal backgrounds, drug use, histories of domestic violence and mental illness, or direct contact with extremists, both domestic and foreign. Actually, it's not that easy if you're legally obtaining them. But see, gun regulation and stuff won't help if you're illegally. Like I tell people, it's really not that hard to go find a, illegal gun. People on the street will tell you, oh yeah, you probably could go find a illegal gun, handgun or something for $50, $100 at the most. It's one of those things they're everywhere. Because they steal them. Or the justice system doesn't work right. Therefore, people that had a legal firearm and got in trouble in a crime might have not properly had all their handguns seized, which I've heard of that. I've heard of people that have caught felonies in one state, went back home and still had all their stuff there. the one particular one I heard about, the guy was actually pretty smart because he sold all of them to someone that could legally own them and wasn't going to do criminal activity. It was a collector or something, if I remember right. And it was a long time ago. But most of them probably might sell them, but they don't care who they sell them to. And then the illegal ones, who knows how long those stay in circulation. I'm sure some end up at the bottom of a river somewhere. Now, I want to get to this other article here. Maybe. And this was against cronycapitalism.org. Some food for thought from Representative Justin Amash on recent tragic events. And really, it's just a post of his Twitter account. And on his Twitter, he said, in response to a terrorist attack, I've heard Democrats and Republicans endorse violating the First and Second, Fourth, Fifth, Sixth, and Eighth Amendments. Now, you know, let's say that they finally get to the point where they're able to actually push this legislation through. What if they, in a way, attempt to just pass bills that are unconstitutional? Obama can use executive order. They could declare war. We could be in trouble. Now, the conspiracy theorists, the actual conspiracy theorists out there are always, every president might declare martial law before the end of the presidency in the next election. I've seen them out again, and I don't know. How bad do we get before we do get one that decides to declare martial law? What if they pull a Katrina and start going house to house? Now, I had an article here by Adam Dick from Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. And it says here, no, there are not hundreds of mass shootings each year in America. On the heels of the mass shooting in Orlando, Florida earlier Sunday morning, the media reports are coming out again of there being hundreds of mass shootings a year in America. For example, we have this headline at Box, after Sandy Hook, we said never again, and then we let 998 mass shootings happen, but the truth is that the number of mass shootings in America is much, much less. That 998 number from Vox amounts to about 23 mass shootings a month, a number that seems ridiculous. Indeed, it is ridiculous. At least the Vox article, a few paragraphs in and after a mass shootings map based on the inflated numbers does mention that under the traditional means of defining mass shootings, instead of a new inflationary method, there are a lot less mass shootings in America. Other news sources won't even throw in this qualification. Instead, they will just run with the big and scary number. The week after the December 2015 mass shooting in San Bernardino, California, I addressed inflated mass shooting numbers in my article, Don't Believe the Hype About Gun Shootings in the U.S. I wrote, Mark Fullman, the National Affairs editor at Mother Jones, writes in a Thursday New York Times op-ed that so far this year there have been 4 mass shootings, not the 355 claimed in the Washington Post or similar numbers asserted elsewhere in the media. The inflated numbers many media report, Fullman explains, are created by broadening the definition of mass shootings far beyond the historical categorization focused on the indiscriminate killing motivated murder of 4 or more people in public venue that Fullman and his Mother Jones colleagues employ. In the once again timely article, I also briefly address 4 additional matters that are important to keep in mind when you see people in the media and politics spreading fear-building messages related to mass shootings. You can read the complete article here. And we've talked about the inflated numbers where now even at times they will try to claim 2 or more people or consider mass shooting 3 or more when the historic numbers were different. Mass shootings haven't gone up. They've changed the definition. And they continue to change the definition. Now I have one clip straight here from Ron Paul Liberty Report. And this is Orlando. Was it LGBT, radical Islam, guns, or something else?
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning into the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. And Daniel, good to see you. I understand you have a bit of an announcement dealing with our program.
Yes, good morning, Dr. Paul, and happy Monday. We got some good news recently. We've just passed our 3 million views on our YouTube show.
Oh, great.
So our subscriber base keeps increasing, and people can subscribe at youtube.com/Ron Paul Liberty Report. So our subscribers are increasing, and we've had over 3 million people watch the show.
Wonderful, wonderful. So we're going to do another show today, and maybe we'll get a few more listeners and viewers in. But, of course, the subject we'll deal with is what's been on the airways for the last couple of days. Obviously, a real tragedy that occurred in Orlando, but many, many different interpretations. And sorting all this out is not always that easy, especially early on. We don't have every single fact. We have some facts, and there's some speculation. But we can also see some groups of people lining up to take advantage of the situation to promote their cause. We have this whole thing about, the anti-gay, anti-lesbian. Mm-hmm. They say, well, it was all hate to do that. And then there's this anti-Muslim group. They say, oh, yeah, these are the Muslims. We need more bombs, in the Middle East. And then we also have the anti-gun people, including the president, an opportunity to go after the gun people. The irony of this whole attack on guns, which everybody suspected, is that more people are buying guns than ever before. It motivates people to understand what's going on. But we have a few other things that we might suggest contribute to that. But those are the things that the people are lining up. Never pass up an opportunity to use a tragedy for somebody's political benefit.
Yeah, as you point out, everyone's lining up to help it push their agenda. Also, there's a benefit. There's something for everyone in an attack like this, and it sounds morbid to say, but it's true. Even the government benefits because they say we need more resources to be able to look into this. People interested in forcing mental health treatment on people will benefit because they'll say if he was mentally ill, then we need to more aggressively pursue medicating people who are suspected of mental illness. So sadly, it is true that so many rush forth to take advantage.
I noticed two announcements, one by Paul Ryan, speaks for a lot of people, and his whole thrust was Islamic terrorism. It never crossed his mind that terrorism is a tactic and is not a precise issue per se. Somebody uses this type of strategy. But his attack was, Islamic terrorism, implying what you just said, is, that'll help me push my agenda through and spend more money on the military-industrial complex. But the president's statement didn't deal with that. It dealt with guns are too easily available and that we need more gun control. And it's the gun that does it. If they didn't have access to the gun, we wouldn't be seeing these people killed. I guess he sort of forgot about Timothy McVeigh and some others who kill a lot of people without guns when they get desperate or when they go out of their minds.
And, of course, this nightclub they were in was a gun-free zone. So having laws and rules against guns doesn't dissuade someone who is determined to use them.
Right. No, and, the other thing that Paul Ryan said, this is an example of cowardness, the people are a coward. But, that never appealed to me as a reason or an excuse because it to me makes me think that these people aren't cowards, but they're out of their minds. If there's this case more so than others, somebody asked me, they said, what do you think was the biggest problem here? And I would say about 95% of it, this guy was deranged. And, even though he did make mention of Islam, and we know he went to Saudi Arabia on 2 occasions, a good place to study about civil liberties and all. But to plan something like this where he knew he was going to die, he can't be of a sound mind. But I think what happens is they're unsound, their mind is unsound, but then they can go on and grasp hold of a few things. If there's some people out there that use religion to cause violence, as they have in Judaism and Christianity and others, that, I'm going, so I might as well do it for a holy cause. But I think this person, from my viewpoint, comes across more deranged and hateful. I mean, you read a story about what his wife has said, and he wasn't exactly a friendly character. And it led to this. It still is a tragedy, but you mentioned it was a gun-free zone. I read, somebody was making that case on the internet, and somebody else typed in, "You pro-gun people, you're just crazy." Because can you imagine somebody in that place with all those people and he has his own pistol and he tries to shoot this guy? What if he missed and killed somebody else? Never once thinking, well, maybe he wouldn't miss anybody and maybe he would have killed him a lot sooner. Yeah. But that's how obsessed they are with this. So you see so much of this trying to move their agenda, whether it's the foreign policy agenda, whether it's the gay agenda or whatever. They will use this as an excuse.
And the issue of the mental illness and the Islam is interesting because apparently, he made pretty flamboyant statements at work. This according to a Wall Street Journal article, claiming that he had friends in Hezbollah and friends in Al-Qaeda. Apparently someone called the FBI, or somehow they got wind of it. They went and they talked to him twice. They interviewed him. And when they interviewed him, they quickly came to the conclusion that he basically didn't know what he was talking about. He didn't know anything about these groups, and therefore they said he wasn't really a threat. He was certainly not in this way. So that would tend to support your view that the person was insane.
And we have evidence of it, that family members had weird ideas too, and the people he worked with said he was, not quite with it. My curiosity is, I wonder if he was on any drugs. I wonder if he had seen a doctor and got psychotropic drugs or something like that, because that compounds the problem, and that may come out later on. That doesn't fully explain it, but the one thing that we did not read about is the possibility that with this deranged mind and influenced by a couple people with weird ideas about religion, and then they put it together, and all of a sudden he comes up with this whole thing. I just think that that is a very strong possibility that the religion did have some part to do with it, but it would be rather minor compared to these other things.
And you mentioned Paul Ryan, of course, trying to take advantage. And many politicians have done this. See, it's radical Islam. The president won't even use the words radical Islam. This is the big thing. But, if people like Paul Ryan were so concerned about radical Islam, why aren't they speaking up about our arming radical Islamic groups in Syria, for example? I think Professor Josh Landis estimated that 60 to 70% of the weapons we give to the moderates there end up in the hands of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Why aren't they worried about that radical Islam? It's
well, another argument that that Ryan made was this guy. He had no respect for borders. And I keep thinking, do we have a lot of respect for borders, where we go and what we do? And then when we look at even the European countries and our country, how we create chaos. Actually, they accept some of our philosophic ideas on economics, government planned economies, which is a disaster in socialism. And then they come in and we go in there and cause chaos. And then what we do is we subsidize the migration. We open up the doors and they come here and they get a lot of money to come here. And as a matter of fact, I think this perpetrator here worked for a company that played a role in moving immigrants or migrants and illegal ones around the country. So here we have these migrants coming in, which means they're breaking down borders, because the migration, that's done with executive order. The Congress doesn't say, well, let's bring so many in here. They just have open ideas and let the president decide. And so that is the abuse of borders. To say that this guy, part of his problem was he was born in America and lived here and became nuts here. And yet now one of the things is pure propaganda, about what they're doing.
And, I think we both read the story in Zero Hedge yesterday, which is a really well-done piece, as they often do, that pointed out the irony, and some more conspiracy-minded might even take it further than that. But the company that he worked for, G4S, which is the largest security firm in the world by revenue, this company had been contracted by the federal government to transport illegal aliens. They're called OTM, other than Mexicans, who have crossed the border into the U.S. They were contracted to transport them up further into the country to relieve some of the pressure down in South. So talk about not respecting the borders, and talk about if there is a problem with radical Islam, talk about the government being colluding with this idea of letting in people that have no idea who they are.
Right. And Adam Dick, somebody on our staff, did a little bit of research after he saw these headlines about how massive this was and how many terrorist attack and multiple killings. But he came up with a statistic that sort of refuted a lot of this scare tactic. It's hundreds and hundreds of these attacks are occurring ongoing.
Yeah, the media likes to throw out 980 some attacks a year, which is ridiculous, because what they do is they sort of dumb down the numbers. So each time maybe it's a family shooting where the father or the mother deranged and kills someone. They'll put that all up as a mass shooting, and so by that way they can also push their agenda, which is often an anti-gun agenda, by making it seem like these things happen every day. Thankfully, they don't.
I get annoyed when anybody sees individuals as part of a group and therefore they belong. Let's say that it's the anti-gay thing. that was the motivating. See, that's wrong because they put everybody into one group, and it should be the initiation of violence, which would be the whole thing. But already these people who are anti-Muslim wants to blame Muslim per se and want to keep all Muslims out. The fallacy in their thinking is they're collectivists in individual liberty. That yes, there is a problem with a certain segment of Muslims, and they have committed acts of violence. But to say that, it's a Muslim problem means they don't have the vaguest idea about what civil liberties are all about. And people gravitate to this. I mean, people say, you're right. I mean, we've had a couple examples of this, so therefore we have to excommunicate and put them out and watch them and not let any more in. And that's exactly what motivated the anti-black, anti-Hispanic, all the prejudice all the way back to anti-Catholic or whatever you want. They put people in groups. And this represents the absence of an understanding or caring about the non-aggression principle. People should be seen as individuals who have inalienable rights to their own life, and they're not a reflection of some group that may have some people in there that did dumb things, and then you get painted with the same brush. I think that's so dangerous. I think that's what's going on here.
The other thing we haven't really discussed is the role of the media in this whole thing. The media is obsessed with printing stories and running stories on TV about the threat from Islam, the threat overseas. And I wonder what effect that has on society, trying to scare people into supporting more military, supporting more U.S. Troops overseas, more bombs overseas. It all has an agenda, but maybe it's contributing to some kind of a mass psychosis on the part of America.
Well, they tend to contribute a lot of harm, whether it's setting the stage for war and invasion of countries and, the military-industrial complex. They have tremendous influence there. So I think that very well could be. But, going back, we mentioned this whole idea about, blowback. I think blowback is related. I don't think that's the number one cause here, because my number one assessment at this current time is that the guy was not, but he was influenced by things, the religious things. But I think this whole idea of building up anger. They say he was a very angry person. So it would be easy, since his dad was from Afghanistan and we bombed there a lot and killed some people. Of course, they had a violent system over there. But I think that this whole blowback phenomenon is real, whether it's the major thing or not, or whether it's just a contributing factor. But we never discuss that. That's the last thing they want, because that would hurt the military-industrial complex. But if the blowback phenomenon is a major part of our problem that we're facing, we would have to admit to something which is not going to happen, that the 25 years that we have just spent since we first went into the Persian Gulf War, I mean, think of how many bombs. I'll bet it's a lot more than we dropped in, matter of fact, I think it was just in Iraq, we probably dropped more than we did in World War II. I mean, just think of all that going on, and to say that, oh, well, we sort of made a mistake and we might have been contributing to this. Everybody wants to talk about the radical Islamic terrorists, and that elicits this fear. But if you're over in those countries and you're on the receiving end of occupation and a lot of innocent people getting killed with drones and bombs and all going on, it's not hard for them to talk and visualize radical Christian crusaders. And, even George Bush used the word crusader. Oh, let's go in now because we got to go get them. We have a crusade to perform. And who wants to be put in the category that we as Christians are part of the aggressiveness of our government? But they have a reason for thinking that, for history, and also certain groups in this country who are well known to be Christians, but they have a different perception on what the initiation of force should be about, and that they're religious for religious reasons as well as practical reasons. They feel obligated and patriotic obligated to support preemptive war. Yeah. And so somebody over there, that could help twist these minds. And you only need one twisted mind out of 10 million to have an impact. And they know that. So that is something that I don't see how it's going to change because there's so much violence going on against us to back off because the American people won't accept that. Because right now, this is an excuse to accelerate bombing. I mean, it's inconceivable, that this would be the answer to it. And because and the other thing is the reason it's not going to stop. It's so sterile now. It isn't like we have to invade with tanks and take over bombers. We just use drones, and we can do a lot more bombing and killing to teach them a lesson. Yeah, here's a guy from the United States, born and raised here, goes nuts, and bombing somebody in the Middle East is in retaliation to this. Where does this come from? Explain that to me.
I think there is a kind of psychosis produced by this sense of American exceptionalism. And I think when people buy into the idea of American exceptionalism, they become incapable of self-reflection. So I think you made a great point earlier. What if the last 25 years was just a great big mistake? It's be difficult for people to face that.
That's for darn sure. They're not likely to do that, but we will do our best to try to look at these issues as objectively as we can. And of course, I start with the premise, as libertarians are supposed to, with the non-aggression principle that you're not supposed to initiate force or violence, and governments aren't supposed to do that either. It's the problem becomes when we're in the mixture, when the retaliation against what we have been doing is difficult to say, well, we need to stop it. What are you going to do? Just let them keep bombing us and killing us? Well, there's a stretch there. That's where the propaganda comes in, where they say there's a lot more happening than it really is. But I think the approach to believing in a strong national defense, believing that American goodness does not incorporate the spread of American values through guns and bombs and invasions and occupations, that has to go. If not, we are not going to be much of a nation because we're working very hard to destroy, the bit of greatness that we still have and the principles of believing in individual liberty. Unfortunately, an event like this seems to stir the pot in a negative manner, and we have to do our very best to emphasize the positive nature of what America is all about and what individual liberty is all about and what our response should be under these circumstances. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.
Again, Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube, RonPaulLibertyReport.com. Don't forget to subscribe. Ron Paul Liberty Report has grown like a lot of alternative media, and it's great to see freedom and liberty outlets grow, because it means that our message is getting out there. It's at least getting heard. You might not always agree on every issue, everything, but it's getting out there. And I think when the message isn't, that we hate each other, that we might disagree on how to live our personal lives, but we do have a pretty common goal if you are a part of the liberty freedom movement that says that we all have the same rights. We have a right to self-defense. We have a right to, pursue career and, education and information, and to strive to create a life for ourselves without harming other people. But we know that there is a large divide and conquer kind of movement going from the elite. They are not wanting people to get along. They don't want people to interact. They don't want discussions between different groups of people that might produce a outcome where they can come together to agree that I might not agree with your personal lifestyle or your maybe religious beliefs, but you have the right to them. And you have the right to be, treated just like any other human being. I do think that there is a respect issue that comes into play, but there's also a cultural issue that comes into play, just even within American society, without looking at maybe foreign cultures within American society. I'm talking about, you have inner city culture compared to rural culture. You have different, sets of what you consider respectful. The inner city urban culture is not always going to understand or even see the respect issue that they might have in a rural setting, because the cultures are different. Same with people from the rural culture don't understand maybe a respect issue that they might have in the inner city. For one example, that a lot of ways that people from the inner city tend to speak to each other might be seen as disrespectful in the rural area. A lot of rural people might not understand that some people in the city look at, people that come in all, stinky, been working on the farm all day, might have a manure smell to them, is disrespectful because they don't, have that there. It's kind of like stepping in dog poop and walking around the store. It might be disrespectful, offensive, even though that still does not give someone the right to abridge another person's freedoms and rights. Now, a store owner that has private property, because that business is private, can go, hey, you can't be in here smelling like that because you're in the Gap. The tractor store might not have a problem with it, but other places may. Again, private company, they have the right to say, we can't have that in here. Again, we have to be able to try to work on understanding other cultures within America, let alone maybe understanding some of the cultures. But we should still, live with the understanding of, actual freedoms and rights, where even if you are from another culture, you don't have the right to harm people, to abridge other people's rights. That's where the issues actually come into play. Just because you come from the inner city doesn't mean you have to be a ruthless gang killer, type person. That's a choice you make, and that's abridging another person's right. And we can't. A lot of people look at libertarians and go, "Oh, you think you can have this utopia without government?" It really is not that. It's the forced coercion using the threat of force, the tyranny that comes behind it. And again, the saying, it's not about not having rules. It's about not having a ruler. You know, we don't believe in some utopia. What we say is that even with government, we still see the same problems. Government has done nothing but created more and more laws, which is in hand also through propaganda, which has been declassified, that has been funded by taxpayer dollars to convince you that things are bad and you shouldn't have them or be around them. And even at young age, where they put it in cartoons and other media devices, even books, and it's one of those things that they have done nothing to actually secure your safety. And it's exactly what our founding fathers have warned against. One of what they have warned against is entangling alliances, meddling in foreign affairs, nation building. The other is giving up your liberties for safety, because you'll end up with neither. And we don't have a society that at one time the Japanese Empire warned against. You didn't want to try to invade the U.S. because behind every door there was a gun. We have large swaths of societies that now have either been disarmed or convinced not to arm themselves. And as we see, there was one that we know of. There's been some eyewitness saying there was possibly 2 shooters. But we even have reports out that the SWAT may have shot innocent people in the gun battle. But for the most part, we have, according to reports, we had one shooter with a whole bunch of disarmed people. Fish in a barrel. The outcome could have been very different. Don't let someone convince you that they'll be there for your safety. 3 hours while a gunman supposedly killed all these people. Again, we don't know how many people he killed, because we don't know how many people that might have been killed or injured from friendly fire. We may never know true numbers either. Okay, let's see where we're at on time. Okay, if I can cover this last article here, maybe. Maybe. This out of the 10th Amendment Center.com. Maybe. Come on. Okay. This one title will keep the Second Amendment and our guns. An article at Counterpunch titled Eliminate the Second Amendment and Keep Your Guns by Tom H. Hastings offers more of the same flawed gun control arguments we've come to expect from the opposition. Here we'll refute them point by point. Hastings writes, okay, I confess I fail to see the thrill or need associated with gun ownership and use if there were no police, you might have a change of heart. But we live in a free country, sort of, and I get why those who hunt need long guns. Except the Second Amendment wasn't written for hunters. George Mason wasn't worried about the feds taking away people's right to well-dressed deer. But I teach, write, and live trying to practice nonviolence between and among humans at least. I suppose that's admirable. What happens when person A practices nonviolence, but person B doesn't and uses violence to violate person A's rights? I'm sure there are people who prefer not to talk or write, but their personal preference shouldn't have any bearing on others' people's right to do either of those two. I've had guns pulled on me and fired at me twice, and I never ever wanted to shoot anyone. That direct violence is beyond my understanding, so I fully acknowledge my bias against guns, especially handguns. So you've met person B, it seems. One can understand why you don't want to shoot somebody, but that doesn't change the fact that they are trying to hurt you. Wouldn't it have been nice to have had a gun to defend yourself? Why advocate disarming more people like yourself? And if you have no desire to fight back, that's your decision. But what exactly authorizes you to make that decision for someone else? Person C might have the option to defend herself against person B. I believe in regulating those things that prove they harm others. No one should be free to harm others. That is not freedom. It is unwarranted, arrogated license. The freedom of your hand stops where my nose begins, as they say. The problem is criminals don't care about regulations. On a side note, they also tend to prefer their victims are unarmed. My real point on the Second Amendment is that it effectively blocks sane control of weaponry. Sane control of weaponry always involves restricting the rights of law-abiding citizens, which is what Hastings is advocating. It never involves restrictions on government, no matter how many innocent people it hurts. This is why we duly appreciate the efforts of founding fathers like George Mason to prevent sane controls from happening. Repealing the Second Amendment would not affect anything that most gun owners feel is desirable. Aside from indiscriminate weapons, any weapon the U.S. military has or will have, I feel, is desirable. I feel most gun owners feel the same. Glad we got that clarified. You can go ahead and read the rest of this at the 10th Amendment Center. It is titled, We'll Keep the Second Amendment and Our Guns. And read the rest of it. It's pretty interesting. And, you know, the whole notion is that someone else, because they want to have a utopia society, not the libertarians, these people believe in a utopia society that they can control people and manipulate people. And it always backfires. It always backfires. The only system that they can create out of that is a control system where in today's society with the use of pharmaceuticals and technology could really hurt the human race. and a free world. So I really think it's time for people to really wake up. Because if we don't, we're headed into dark times, and it doesn't look good for the future. We have a government, a elitist population, the shadow government, and all these powers that seem to be working together to break down society so they can initialize some type of global governance. And you have the UN calling for it. You have our politicians. You have other countries that have their rights taken away where they can't walk the streets with the flooded immigration like we're starting to experience here in America. I believe that going into the future, depending on how the election cycle turns out and the person that is put into power, which I think, it's either going to be Hillary or Donald, I believe, just because of all the BS. It'll just always end up being one of those two. I don't see the third party. I hope that we get a third party that maybe can push both of them out of the picture. But if we get either Hillary or Trump, I think Trump would be the only one that might do something. But I don't trust that it will be the best and what we need. More of a temporary Band-Aid that the wound never even got cleaned. So you still have the problem of infection. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Don't forget to go to ucy.tv. There is a support tab at the top. You can donate. But if you scroll down towards the bottom, there's an Amazon button. If you click that Amazon button, you can shop Amazon through ucy.tv. Same great prices, same great shipping rates. And at the same time, UCY gets a little kickback to help cover operating costs here at ucy.tv, which gives us great platform for me and the other hosts here to spread the message of freedom and give you the information that mainstream media won't. So definitely go check it out and help support alternative media. And, when I talk about prepping and being diverse with where you put your wealth, Bitcoin, precious metals, I do a lot of precious metals. And again, don't ever put all your eggs in one basket, but make sure that you do have some eggs in all the baskets. I trust Amagi Metals. Great prices, great shipping rates, great customer service. If you go to antityrannynews.com/metal, go check them out, and we get a little kickback to help cover our operating costs on this end. And don't forget, we also have a donate tab at antityrannynews.com/donate. If you donate, we are trying to get out to PorkFest next week if we get the funds. We have taken a little bit of a hit on funds lately, so we aren't going, broke, but we don't have the funds to get out to PorkFest quite yet. So hopefully by the end of the week we can have those funds. So you can also go there to help. Again, thanks for tuning in.